Prepare each student to be successful. That is the mission of our school district. We spent a lot of time on this over the last couple of years. As it relates to our strategic plan, you can note to the right are our 4 pillars of our strategic plan. We're using those 4 pillars as the foundation of our work. First and foremost, the top pillar refers to student learning. Obviously, that's why we're here. The second pillar is about retaining quality staff and recruiting quality staff, and that has a lot to do with this referendum as it relates to maintaining operations, and obviously staff tied directly into student learning. The third component is to responsibly and effectively deal with our operations facilities and our maintenance issues. And of course, the last is connecting with family and community, which is very important in public education today. To do all of that, we need resources, and that really is the base of the issue that we have in our school district, and quite frankly, it's an issue that we've had for quite some time. We spend more than we bring in. You know, it's an issue that we all deal with in our lives. Businesses deal with it on a regular basis. Our expenditures exceed our revenue. This has been an issue in our school district since 1993, when revenue limits were imposed based on spending in 1992. There was a freeze in 93, and if you were a low-spending school district, i.e. Stevens Point, you were frozen at a very low level. And of course, there are other schools that had a freeze at a low level. However, if you were a high-spending school district, you also had a freeze at a very high level. So the disparity between the cost per pupil within the state of Wisconsin is fairly dramatic. The bottom is $9,400 per student. That's the minimum. That's where we sit as a school district. The top exceeds into the $10,000, $11,000, $12,000 per student. So there's quite a difference. So they're trying to raise the bottom up. Next year, the 94 will go to 96. Following year, 98, 10,000, 10,2. So they can decrease the gap between revenue as it relates to high spending and low spending school districts. We addressed the issue in '06, went to a referendum for $8.8 million for a non-recurring purpose, which means you pick a period of time. We chose 3 years at that particular point in time. So we successfully passed that, which meant we increased our revenue by $8.8 million for 3 years. Of course, year 4, that drops off the books, and then you have a funding cliff. So we went back to referendum in '09, and that failed. We dropped it a little bit, 7.7. In 10, we went back again, dropped it to 7.1, and it failed again. At that particular time, the school board administration stepped back and had to make some decisions to balance the budget. The decision that was made was, for the most part, maintain programming, which the programming are people, at the expense of maintenance. So we deferred maintenance for quite some time. We still continue to defer maintenance. We cut technology budget significantly, and of course, you're all painfully aware we had very limited salary increases for staff over the period of time. Snap forward to 2016, about the same time I was hired, the district brought in Nexus Solutions, which is an engineering firm, to come into our buildings to take a look at all of our facilities and our systems to evaluate where we're at. They also took all of the facility studies over the course of time and then put that together along with literally binders full of technical information related to facilities, and worked with myself and other district administrators to bring forward a recommendation to the board. We started bringing information to the board last January. I met with all staff last spring, received some feedback, met with a community focus group a couple different times to receive feedback, and ultimately went to the board in July after many, many meetings with a specific recommendation to go to a referendum in 2006 to address 2 issues, 2 questions: operations and maintenance. Separate. Those of you that were here last year will recall we are looking at one question, very similar to what we did in '08 '06. We are looking at going to one question for approximately $9 million to address everything. We learned in a community survey that was put out by Nexus Solutions last spring a number of things. First of all, we learned that there's a tremendous amount of support for our schools in our community. We learned that people are willing to pay more for quality education. We learned, however, we still were asking for too much, so we had to decrease it. We also learned that we have to separate the questions. We have to separate the issues of operations and facilities. Because there are, quite frankly, people that will support programming, education for kids, which includes staff, but may not support putting money into facilities. And just the opposite. There are people that will support facilities, but not necessarily programming. So when you put everything together, we're not going to pass anything. So our study gave us enough information to separate those, and quite frankly, it also gave us enough information, data, in that we believe we have a reasonable shot now at passing both of these questions. So let's talk a little bit about the questions. Well, before I do that, we learned, and I kind of went over this, we have issues with programming, deferred maintenance, safety and security, as well as improvements to some of our learning spaces. I'm going to break that down, and I got a little problem here, Steve. The first is an issue as it relates to our operational referendum. Our first is the operational referendum. We are going to ask the community to support an increase to our revenue limit. When I talk about $9,400 per student, we would like to increase that by $3.5 million on a recurring basis. Very different than in '06 and '09 and '10, where it was non-recurring, set for 3 years. This is going to be recurring each and every year. That's used for programming. We're earmarking $2 million for programming, which really includes maintaining our staff and programs for kids, sustaining compensation models. It also addresses technology and deferred maintenance. It will allow us to create a sustainable preventative maintenance budget so we can start looking into the future as it relates to maintenance rather than deferring it, as well as creating a sustainable technology budget that we can sustain to meet the needs of our students. That will result in the first question. The first question, you can see, and this is exactly the wording, is for $3.5 million. That will be an increase of 77 cents per thousand. So if you have a $100,000 evaluation on your home, your taxes go up $77. The average home in our school district is approximately $140,000. So prorate up, prorate down, depending on your own tax assessment. The other issue that we have to address relates to facilities. The first is deferred maintenance that I've talked about. This is the stuff that you do in your own homes. We have 20 buildings in our school district that are valued well over $200 million, and we haven't been putting the money into it that we need to maintain them. This is the stuff that you don't see. Much of it relates to heating system, HVAC systems. It's the boilers in the basement. It's the electrical issues within the wall. It's the univents. We're talking about roofs, electricity, pipes. We are pulling out pipes and spash right now that are literally decayed and rotted away, and we have several of those throughout the school district. The other issue we need to address relates to the safety and security of our facilities. This building has some improvements that will be addressed as it relates to the entrance of the building. However, we have some real significant issues. If you go into Clover Whiting, for example, elementary school, you'll walk in what looks like a side door, and then you go down a hall and you take a left down to the office. You can simply take a right and you're throughout that building. You can go to PJ's and walk in and be upstairs before anybody realizes you're in the building. And so those are issues we have to address. We have to address our surveillance equipment throughout the school district. Some of the schools have them, some of them don't. Those that have, let's talk about SPASH just briefly. They have cameras everywhere. They have a tremendous amount of surveillance equipment, but it's so aged that the quality is very, very poor. So when issues happen throughout the building and we've got to pull out video, it's very difficult to actually see what we need to see. We received from the Department of Justice a grant last fall for over 200 grand. We just were notified yesterday that we're going to receive about 300 grand in the next wave of grants that will be coming out literally over the next month. So we're receiving well over $500,000 for safety and security, and that's awesome. We're going to utilize that starting with SPASH, but to address the district needs, it's well over $3 million alone. So those are issues regarding safety and security that will be involved with this particular question. And then the other issue relates to our learning spaces. We're addressing, to the extent that we can, learning spaces as it relates to improving the quality of education for our students, specifically at SPASH, and I bring SPASH up because eventually all of our students get there. It's also the building that's going to see the most amount of work as it relates to money. We're looking at expanding the tech ed department as well as improving, remodeling the tech ed area that we have. We have well over 400 jobs alone right now in central Wisconsin related to some degree with technology, whether it be IT and coding to manufacturing and engineering. So there's a real need in our community as it relates to workforce development in the area of technology. We're also looking at adding on a larger common cafeteria space between our current common area down that ramp in that particular area going to the field house. So our students have a proper place to eat, for one thing. Right now it gets so crowded in there that we oftentimes don't have enough seats. The students are separated between the north and the south. It's very difficult to supervise that. And then we'll provide a large learning space for students as well as a large gathering space for our community with all the community activities that we have. And of course, it's going to include bathrooms down by the field house. We don't have bathrooms down there, and we have community in there almost daily. It causes a real complication and inconvenience for people. The next question is a bond referendum question. A bond is very much like your home mortgage. You borrow, you take out money, buy a home, you pay principal and interest over a period of time, whether it be 15, 25, or 30 years. You pay your principal interest monthly and on an annual basis. It gets reduced, and then eventually you pay it off. This is very similar. This allows the district to borrow up to $75.9 million. Now, that's a lot of money. I get that. It's hard for any of us to wrap our head around that. But if we break that down, out of that $75.9 million, $50 million is for deferred maintenance. It's for the stuff that we've been just kicking down the road. PJ Jacobs is over 80 years old. It has the original steam heating system in it. That's a problem. It's well over 80 years old. That alone is going to cost $7 million. We're doing the same thing right now at SPASH, and it's costing us $12 million. That was a project that we were able to move through an Act 32 project that the board approved last December, which no longer exists. Act 32 has been in our budget for years and years and years. Stevens Point used it for many years. I've used it in all of my other school districts. It allowed school boards to borrow money for projects related to energy efficiency without going to a referendum. We no longer can do that. The positive thing, we were able to take what we had when we started this 2 years ago, $150 million worth of identified issues. They're all prioritized in 1, 2, and 3. In about 6 minutes, 2 years ago, we threw the threes out. In about 6 months, we went through the twos. We threw the twos out. And then we spent a year reprioritizing our number one priorities. And we got that down from 150 to 170, 125 based on that Act 32 project I just talked about. And then we got it down to 85 million. And then after our survey, that showed a tremendous amount of support, other than we're still asking for too much money, we dropped it from 85 to 75. We dropped it basically by taking out some athletic facilities out of SPAC, out of this building, and out of PJ's. And going back to our survey, all of the issues that I'm talking about throughout the district were ranked. First and foremost, and there were many of them, 20 of them. First and foremost, the most important thing to our community is safety and security. I think we can all agree with that. Second was technology. I like to hear that. Dead last, and actually getting it negative support, was added a gymnasium and gymnastic space and locker room space. So obviously that would have stopped this thing from moving forward. So that's how we got it down to $75.9 million. To pay this off, it'll be an increase of 69 cents per thousand, or $69 on a $100,000 evaluation. So that's where we're at right now. We have these issues that we have to address, and of course there's consequences if we don't. The first question is an operations question. Operations start July 1, they end June 30th. That's where we use the revenue limit of $9,400 per student, as I talked about earlier. We take the third Friday count from last 2 Fridays ago. We should have that finalized next week. We certify that in a couple weeks, but we literally take that number, which is going to be 7,300 and something, multiply it by $9,400, and that's what our revenue limit is. Other districts that have a higher level can take the 7,300 and they might be multiplying that by $1,100. It is what it is. The only way to increase the $9,400 is via a referendum. However, if we don't pass this, I also said earlier, the state's trying to decrease that gap by bringing the bottom up. Next year, the 94 goes to 96, the following year to 98, 10,000, and it keeps moving up for, I think, till 2022. If we don't pass this, we get penalized, and we'll be frozen again for 3 years at $9,400. That'll cost our school district $4 million over the next 3 years. So there's a heavy consequence for not moving that forward. And I've been through this before. Eventually, referendum do pass, but what gets cut between now and then? And that's the concern that I have. The other issue, and typically if you make some cuts and go back to a referendum, you go to referendum, down the road, you're going to maintain what you have. You don't go back and try to pick up what was cut. So there's some urgency here. And the other, as it relates to the Capitol, I can't stand up in front of staff and our community and say we've got safety and security issues. And if we don't pass a referendum, those problems are still here. I have to do something about that. And unfortunately, what are our options? Because that has to get done. We can't continue to defer maintenance. Some of that stuff has to get done. And typically with a bond referendum, what happens if it doesn't pass? We step back, we reprioritize, we cut some more stuff out, we go back to referendum. In the meantime, construction costs go up 5% a year, interest rates are now going up. You end up going back for less of a project, and it's still going to cost the community just as much money. So that's where we're at. We're really at a crossroads in terms of our financial issues as a school district. And when we take a look at our tax rate, and this is what we've got going for us right now. We've always been a very low spending and frugal school district. Because of that, we have a low tax base. Those of you that are paying taxes are looking at your taxes bill and saying, nobody wants to see an increase in tax. But if you make a comparison to the state is the green line. If we pass both of these questions, the increase will be $146 for both of them on a $100,000 evaluation. If we pass both, we'll go from purple to gold. These are our neighbors. Mosinee, Arbondale, Marshfield, Rapids, Evereston, and Wausau are already taxed higher than we are. If we pass both these questions, we'll still be below our neighbors. We'll still be below the state average. And of course, that's because we've always been a very frugal, responsible school district. It's also because these districts have recently gone to a referendum. And of course, their tax rate now reflects their increased referendum, which, however, will still be higher than ours. So there is a referendum on November 6th. It's a very complicated ballot. There are two sheets to it, or excuse me, two sides to it. There's a front and a back. Obviously, this is a significant referendum in our state as it relates to a very political gubernatorial race. The county has 3 questions. They have a binding referendum for a senior center, operational, similar to ours, and 2 non-binding, which are advisory to the state for medical marijuana and dark store, it's called, which is a taxation loophole as it relates to big box stores. That's not what I'm trying to explain. My point is, we got 5 referendum questions on this ballot. We're on the back side, dead last. And that's statutorily where school referendum go. We're not in control of that. So the message that I have to people is read through the ballot. First of all, vote. Tell everybody you know to vote. I can't tell you how to vote, but I can tell you, please vote. Please understand and talk to as many people you can about the fact we have a referendum coming up, and then what the information is, why we're going, what we're going for, and what are the ramifications if this thing doesn't pass.